This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi, welcome back to the boat that sometimes is better to miss. We're continuing in the sugya in Yevamos of Mayim She'en Lahem Soif. We're speaking about the Titanic and the situation where, because of the policy of women and children first, and most of the survivors then were women, and most of those who perished were men. So there were many women who were left as an aguna, not knowing the whereabouts of their husband. So we learned the Gemara in Yevamos. The Gemara in Yevamos brought the psak of the Chachamim, and the conclusion of the Gemara in Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis was that Di'eved in L'charchila Loi, the Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, Di'eved in L'charchila Loi, and the Gemara said that on Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph as well. V'loihi loishna in ishta'alma, v'loishna tsurba mirabanan, di'eved in l'charchila loi. That b'di'eved, if a woman gets married when her husband is lost in endless waters, then b'di'eved she could stay married, but l'charchila she is not allowed to remarry. Okay, so we have to talk about two things. First of all, we mentioned that Tosfos has a question, and Tosfos should be on your sheet in number 32. And Tosfos asks, Rav Ashi said the following. Rav Ashi made a statement that when do we say that l'chadchila a woman's not to remarry when her husband gets lost in Mayim She'en Lahem Soif? That's a regular person. But if the husband was a tzurba mirabanan, if the husband was a Torah scholar, then why? There's no way the husband emerged from the water, because if he would have emerged from the water, we would have heard about it. Remember that? That Rav Ashi's opinion was the halacha that Mayim She'en Lahem Soif l'chadchila loi tinase. That's only if the husband was a regular guy. But if the husband was a tzurba miraban, if he was a Torah scholar, then we have another indication he's dead. First of all, most people die in Mayim She'en Lahem Soif. And even if he's from the Miyot, I have a question. If he's alive and he emerged, why hasn't the rumor spread that he's alive? If it would be a regular person, I mean, that's what it means. Any important person, any person with a good reputation, if people know about it, who's well known, why didn't we hear about it? So, and the Gemara says no. The Gemara says no. Ultimately, even a Torah scholar, if he's lost in Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, the woman still can't remarry. So Tosfos asks, what do you mean? But most Surah Mirabanan, if they survive, it's going to have a call, and people are going to hear about it. So says Tosfos, no, we don't worry about that roiv. Just like we don't worry about the roiv of a goyses. If you know someone is a goyses, you can't testify that they died, even though roiv goysesim die. So too here, even though most Surah Mirabanan, if they emerge, we're going to know about it, nevertheless, you cannot allow the woman to get married l'charchila. From this Tosfos, the Achronim say that we learn something very important. And that is, even if you have two roivs that say that the person perished, roiv number one was most people perish in Mayim She'en Lahem Soif. Roiv number two is if he would have survived, we would have heard about it. Even in a situation of two roivs, still she can't remarry. And this is a very important factor, because when we're dealing with Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, what's the halacha? L'chadchila she can't remarry, but b'di'eved if she marries, she's allowed to stay married. So question for you. Are we dealing with an Isser D'Oraisa or Isser D'Rabbanan? What are we dealing with? We have to be dealing only with an Isser D'Rabbanan, because if it would be an Isser D'Oraisa, we would not allow her to stay, right? It would not be that b'di'eved she could stay married. If you're dealing with an Isser D'Oraisa, there's no way she could stay married. So elamai, you're dealing with an Isser D'Rabbanan. So you would expect then, if it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan and a Chshash D'Rabbanan, then if we could add an additional factor to say, you know what, in this case, not only is it reasonable that he died because it's Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, but we have an additional reason to assume he died, then you should probably be able to be Mekel But yet you see from Tosfos that even with an additional roiv, you still can't be mekel. Okay? So that's going to be a very frightening factor that we have to deal with, because we see from Tosfos that even with a preponderance of evidence that he's dead, nevertheless, she still can't remarry.
How could they say that she can get married? How can she
No, we don't. It's b'di'evet if she does.
What is supposed to say is b'di'evet.
B'di'evet is she didn't know the halacha, and she got married, so we're not gonna force them to part from each other.
But since they have such a chumrah, they should say, "I'm sorry,
That machmir we're not. We're only machmir l'chachila. We're not machmir b'di'evet. Okay, so let's just proceed a little bit. I want to tell you over Rabbi Kiva Eger's kasha on the Gemara. The Gemara on Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. So going back to your sheets, number 5 on the sheets, the Gemara recorded a story that a guy was walking around, and he said, anyone here from Beichasa's house? Chasa drowned. So now this was sort of a testimony that Chasa went into Mayim She'en Lahem Soif. So Rav Nachman went, and Rav Nachman swore, Amar Rav Nachman ha Eloikim achlu kvari lechasa. A fish ate Chasa. Meaning Rav Nachman swore that Chasa died. And yet the Gemara says, was this woman allowed to remarry? No.
Did he say he saw the fish eating?
No, he heard the testimony that he died, and therefore he swore that he died. So Rav Nachman...
And how could Rav Nachman do that?
Okay, so let's analyze what's going on over here. Is this woman allowed to remarry? No, because the guy fell into Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, and maybe a wave came and took him to the other side of the lake. Maybe a plank came his way and he grabbed onto it. Maybe he went into a burrow that the fish made. There are many very remote possibilities that he's still alive. Therefore, she can't remarry. And yet, Rav Nachman swore that he died. So, fragt Rabbi Kiva Eger, if Rav Nachman was able to swear that he died, why isn't that enough evidence that she could remarry? So Rabbi Kiva Eger on the page quotes the Tshuvas Maimonides. Ve'ein l'tmai Rav Nachman de ishtava de achli kvari lechasa heichi ishtava hachi haki swear this kivin de amar ishte asura. If we say that the woman can't remarry, alma mesafgale imayasila, that means we're masupik. If we're masupik, how could he swear? The answer is, Roiv says the guy died. Derubam einitzal. Most people, if they go into Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, they're not making it through. And since we have a Roiv, Rav Nachman was allowed to swear, because a Roiv is enough evidence to swear. Rav Nachman shaper shtava. Because even to kill someone, we will rely on a Roiv. What's halacha? If Chas v'Shalom, we warn a potential murderer, don't shoot. And if you shoot, we're going to give you capital punishment. We're going to kill you, and he shoots. Do we kill him? Yeah. Wait a second. Maybe the person he killed is a treifa, has a mortal wound, and if you kill a treifa, you're not chayiv misa. So why do we kill a murderer? How do we know that the person who he killed is a viable human being? What's the answer to that question? We follow roiv. Whoa! That means through a roiv that's strong enough to take a life. But even though roiv is strong enough to take a life, it's not strong enough to allow a woman to remarry. The choimer of Eishes Ish is so much that even though it's enough evidence to swear, and it's enough evidence to take a life, it's not enough evidence to allow a woman to remarry. Rav Nachman shaper shtav da filu bedinei nefasha zlina basaruba ela de ba'arayis machmirin va'amrinan the chanchila loy tinasei afagav the ruba maisi. Even though most die, she still can't remarry. My Rabbi say, is this a chashash d'Rabbanan or a chashash d'Oraisa? In other words, when we tell the woman not to remarry, is it we're worried on a biblical level or we're worried on a rabbinic level?
Sounds like it's the rice.
No?
Because if it's so chaymer on the woman.
Yes, but, one second. Is it d'Oraisa or d'Rabbanan? We said it has to be d'Rabbanan. Because if it was d'Oraisa, imnises, if she got married, the halacha would be she couldn't stay married if it was a chash d'Oraisa. Fine. However, now we continue on in the Titanic. Look in number 11. Look in number 11. It's a Mishnah in Gittin. Says the Heilige Mishnah, Now, right now, if it's only Chash Rabbanon, maybe with the Titanic we have Makom Lahakel. Why? Because since it's only Nisr Rabbanon, maybe if we add other factors, we have what to play around with. Again, if you're dealing with an Isser Daraisa, you can't play around with it. You're not going to be able to find a kula to get you out of Isser Daraisa. This is Rabbanon, there might be more flexibility. It says, you're right. So Tosfos already made things very difficult for us. But it's going to be even more difficult if we're dealing with an Isser Daraisa. But you're right. Tosfos good. We're going to have to deal with that Tosfos. I'll give you a hint right now. One potential way to deal with Tosfos is as follows. You know why by Tsurba Mirabanan we're Machmir? Maybe really I'll tell you when you have two roivs will be Mekel. So why by Tsurba Mirabanan we Machmir? Because that second roiv is you're getting yourself into a very difficult situation. Because what are you going to carve out an exception? For this guy who dies, the husband could remarry. Right? For this guy who died, the wife could remarry. But if he's just a regular guy, she can't remarry. No, the Chachamim don't work that way. They normally say loy plug. Maybe the reason why, if the guys at Tzor Merabanan were not Mekel, it's not because we're not Mekel by two roivs. Maybe we are in general Mekel by two roivs. But by this particular situation, since it's too individualized, we're going to say, since everyone else can't remarry, you can't remarry either. But if we had a uniform across the board second roiv that applied to everybody, maybe then we could be Mekel. Okay, but here's the problem. We're going to come to the Mishnah in. Should we close the window maybe? We're going to come to the Mishnah in Gittin. The Mishnah in Gittin says on Daf Chav Chesam and Beis. Shloisha Dvarim Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Perta. Rabbi Elazar ben Perta said three things. Lifnei Chachamim. V'kimu es Dvarav. And they, I'm up to number 11. Three things Rabbi Elazar ben Perta said, and they followed him. Al ir shikifu karkaim, a city surrounded by an army. V'al asvina hamaturefes bayam, and a boat that's storm-tossed. V'al hayoytze lidain, and if someone is being judged for a capital punishment, shehein bechezkas kayamin, that they are assumed to be alive. Meaning just because a city is surrounded by an army, or a boat is in a storm, or someone is being judged, they're assumed to be alive. Aval ir shekivsha karkaim, but a city that was conquered by an army, usfina sha'avda bayam, or a boat that got lost in the sea, the hayoytze lehareg, or someone who is being taken out for capital punishment, noisnen aleim, we put on them chumrei chayim v'chumrei mesim, the stringencies of someone to be who's alive, and the stringencies of someone who died. So here we have a case where a boat is lost at sea, drowned, and we say we give him the chumrei chayim, that he's suffik alive, suffik dead. What does this sound like? 50-50. D'oraisa or d'Rabbanan? Sounds like d'oraisa, meaning a guy, if a boat is lost at sea and drowned at sea, it sounds like 50% he's alive, 50% he died, and it's a suffix d'oraisa, and if the woman were to remarry, we would say, teitzei, she has to get divorced. So this Mishnah in Gittin is a stira to the Gemara in Yavamas. The Gemara in Yavamas says, mayim she'en lohem soif, it's only chash d'Rabbanan, but if she marries, lo teitzei. And here the Mishnah says in Gittin that we place on him chomrei chayim chomrei mesim, and we have to assume that the worst. We have to assume the worst, that he's alive, and she can't marry. And if she marries, l'chayra, she would have to get divorced. So this is the kasha, the Rashba. There's a stira. The Gemara in Yavama says, l'chadchila lo tinase, and here we're saying, no, even b'diavad, suffik alive, suffik dead. So comes the Rashba, and the Rashba says, no, you're making a big mistake. Look in the Rashba and the Tshuvas Harashba. This is Shaus Tshuvas Harashba that's ascribed to the Ramban. It's attributed to the Ramban, but it's really the Tshuvas of the Rashba. It's attributed to the Ramban. It says the Rashba, Lefikach ani tzarich laharachimcha. I need to be lengthy here. Ulevar lecharoiv inyanim. Uchedeshin es boinen eich nase ve'ich tzarich lachgar. Imra shetava mamish v'sha kedei shetetze nafshay v'loi ra'uhu Oishema ra svina mutarefes bayam v'chishva li shaver Oishara shenishbra svina b'lavyam. Says the Rashba, you got to get your facts straight. What happened? Did you see the guy drown, or did you just see the boat go under? In other words, like this. Says the Rashba, there's a big difference between seeing a guy fall into Mayim Shein Lahem Soif or seeing a boat sink. In the Gemara in Yavamis, we're talking about you saw someone fall into Mayim Shein Lahem Soif. If you see a person fall into Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, you could assume he died. It's only Chshash Rabbanon that she can't remarry. But if you see the boat sink, then even on a Deraisa level, you don't know that he died. Maybe he held onto a plank. Maybe he went on a lifeboat. Maybe he grabbed onto something. In other words, there's a fundamental difference between seeing somebody drowning themselves and seeing a boat drown. If the Gemara, the Sugya in Yavamis of seeing a person, the Sugya in Yavamis, a Mayim Shein Lahem Soif is talking about a guy in Mayim Shein Lahem Soif. The Sugya in Gittin, the Mishnah in Gittin, that we give him Chaymer Chayim and Chaymer Mesim, that's talking about not a person falling into Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, it's talking about the boat. Ki roiv ha'olam karin l'chal hadvarim ha'ila tfiyos. Most people group and lump all of this together as drowning. Vein medaktikin, and they're not careful bein shenishbra asfina b'makam rachayik ma'oid me'o'ir, whether the boat broke in a faraway place, sheyachshvu harayin, that people think sheyaf shalami shenafal shamli natzel, v'latzis el hayabasha. People think whoever fell off cannot be saved. Or if you see somebody drowning and the water covering him. There's a very big difference between this and that. And if you ask me, says the Rashba, because even if you testify that someone drowned and fell under the water, the amount of time that it should take to die, and you didn't see him go up, nevertheless the woman can't marry. Look in the words of the Rashba, about 2/3 of the way down. The first word on the line is shara'uhu. Da, ki b'meyid shetava mamish, if you testify that someone drowned. V'shala alav, and you waited there, afal pishal chiloi tinasa, even though l'chadchila she can't get remarried, but im nisseis b'diavad loy teitzei, b'diavad she's not divorced. K'mash amru b'sof yavamos. However, a few lines down, if all you see is the boat going down, that's nothing. And if she gets married, she has to get divorced. Maybe she was saved on a piece of wood, a kaira or a beam. In the Mishnah and Gittin about a boat that is storm-tossed in the sea, that is not even a suffix. But Rabbi said, the way the Rashba answers the stira, that there's a difference between a boat sinking and a guy sinking, the Titanic is going to be a very difficult problem. Because it's very unlikely that anybody saw a person drowning in the ocean. At most, you could testify, I know the guy was on the ship and the ship went down. But if that's the only thing you could testify to, then you have to give him the Chomrei Chayim, and it would be not a suffix d'Rabbanan, l'charchila loy tinaseh. If it would only be l'charchila loy tinaseh, so we'll throw in other heterim that no one survived and the water was cold. We'll come up with other heterim. But if all you could testify is that the boat went down, now we're dealing with the suffix d'Iraisa, you're not gonna be able to wiggle out of this. That's how the Rashba differentiates between Yavamis, where it's l'charchila, and Gittin, where it's a suffix d'Iraisa. If you look in the Rambam, in the Perish HaMishnayos on Gittin, the Rambam gives an answer to differentiate between Yivamis and Gittin. That might give us some more flexibility. The Rambam says, look on the second line, Sfina sha'avda bayam. You know what the case of Sfina sha'avda bayam hu? The Rashba said the boat went down. No, shenishbara hakelim. The vessels broke. The oars broke. The sails broke. The ha'etzim shala. V'nevad hakol. And v'nishra asfina pnei hamayim. And all you're left with is the boat itself. You know when it's a suffix d'oraisa if he's alive or not? You know what it means? Sfina sha'avda. The oars broke. The anchor broke. The sails broke. The mast of the ship broke. But the ship is intact.
So
that's when it's a suffix d'oraisa. When is it a suffix d'Rabbanan? When the ship sinks.
But why is that called a Sfina sha'avda?
Because the
If
accessories
broke.
Because in the world of the Rambam, if the ship itself broke, that's analogous to the guy drowning. So, but v'nishra hasfina pnei hamayim. Now the boat remains on the face of the water, and hagas hamayim. And now we have no ugin, or mershoitais. And now we have to assume the guy might have died, suffix. But if the boat drowned, that's mayim shein lahem soif, that it's only l'charchila. So according to the Rambam, the Titanic wouldn't be Sfina Sha'avda Bayam. That would be like seeing a guy drowning, and it would only be a Chshash D'Rabbanan. So basically, you have a Machlokes, Rashba. You have two Gemaras. In Yivamis, we say don't marry l'charchila. In Gittin, we say don't marry even b'diavad. So how do you reconcile it? The Rashba says the Yivamis is talking about the guy. Gittin is talking about the boat. When the boat drowns, it's a suffix d'oraisa, maybe the guy's alive. So according to the Rashba, we're in hot water. But according to the Rambam, the way to reconcile Yivamis and Gittin is, Yivamis is talking about drowning, be it the guy, be it the boat. And Gittin is talking about the oars breaking. That's a d'oraisa. Now what would the Titanic be? Titanic went down. Remember we learned there's so much water in the front of the boat that ultimately the whole thing sunk. It took them 70 years to find any relics. So according to the Rambam, you're only dealing with the D'Rabbanan, so there's more room to work with. By the way, Rav Betzalel Ashkenazi, who was the author of the Shita Mikubatzas, and Rav Betzalel Ashkenazi was a contemporary of the Arizal, and possibly even a Rebbe of the Arizal. Rabbi Tzalal Ashkenazi quotes the Rashba, but then he says on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line, he says even though the Rashba says that it's only a suffix d'Rabbanan if you're made that he was Tava Mamish, but we find the Rambam, he quotes the Rambam, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the end, Mashma davka b'chahai gavna shenishar adayin guf hasfina shalem. Only if the boat remain intact, then it's a suffix d'oraisa noisnim aleim chomer chayim de'efsher dehamayim haruach yolichul yabasha. Because it's possible the water or the wind brought him to the dry land. Avalam hi'idu shenishbara, but if you testify that it broke, or shenitva, or it drowned, b'cheskas meisim heim minatayra. Then midaraisa we assume he died, and v'emnisis loiteitze. So the Rabbi Tzalal Ashkenazi therefore says, since the Rambam is mekel, not only if the guy drowns b'diavad, but even if the boat sinks, we paskin like the Rambam, we go like the greatest Rishon, and therefore lamaisa, if a boat sinks, l'charchila she can't get married, but if she did, b'diavad it's okay. Comes the Radvaz. The Radvaz was the Rebbe of the Arizal, and he disagrees, and he says the Rambam does not argue on the Rashba. Do you know why the Rambam said the case of Sfina Sha'avda Bayam is a case where just the oars were destroyed, but the boat is intact? Not because if the boat sank, that would be, we would assume a d'oraisa, he's dead, it's only chashash d'Rabbanan. No, the Rambam would agree to the Rashba, that even if the boat sank, we put on him the Chomer Chayim and the Chomer Mesim. The Rambam would agree to the Rashba that the only time b'diavad they could stay married is if the guy sank. But if the boat sank, then even b'diavad they can't stay married. So why did the Rambam only say the case is that the oars broke? The Rambam should have said an even bigger chiddush, that even if the boat broke, then we give him the chaymras of being alive. The answer is, the Rambam is saying a chiddush the other way. That even in a case where the boat is intact and only the oars broke, we also put on him the Chaimrei Mesim, because it's a suffix both ways. In other words, the Rambam would agree to the Rashba that if the boat sinks, still Midairaisa, you have to assume the guy is alive, and B'di'eved, she would have to get divorced. So then, why didn't the Rambam say a bigger chiddush that even if the boat sinks, we give you the Chaimrei Chayim? Because the Rambam's saying a chiddush the other way, that even if the boat did not sink and you only lost the oars, we're machmer on you that we also give you the Chaimrei Mesim. But the Rambam didn't mean that if the boat sinks, we don't give you the Chaimrei Chayim. If the boat sinks, then we still have to assume that you're dead. In other words, the Rashba says if the boat sinks, we place on you Midaraisa the Chaimer that you're alive.
How do you come to know that the boat only lost its oars and its mast?
You see, people saw that. People saw.
If there were people there to see it, why didn't they rescue the people on the boat? If the boat sinks, there's nothing you can do.
I don't know. It's kasha and maisa. You know, they didn't know how to swim. They were too far. Look in the Radvaz. The Radvaz says, "Aval ein ani maskem la'olam l'chadesh machlokes midaiti." I don't agree to make up a machlokes. Kivan shalei nimtza mafurash. We don't find explicitly that the Rambam would say that if you see the boat sinking, right? We were trying to say that the Rambam would say if you see the boat sinking, it's only chashash d'Rabbanan. Ve'ein noisin alav chomrei chayim. The Rashba says if the boat sinks, we put on you the chomrei chayim. We were trying to say, the Rabbi Ashkenazi was trying to say, if the boat sinks, we don't put on you the chomrei chayim midaraisa. But the Radvaz says it's very hard for me to believe that the Rambam would argue on the Rashba, because the Rambam argues on the Rashba. He should have said explicitly that if the boat sinks, then we don't put on you the chomrei chayim. The Rambam should have said clearly, when do we put on you the chomrei chayim? That's only if the oars are lost. But if the boat sinks, then we don't put on you the chomrei chayim. So therefore, says the Radvaz, in my opinion, whether you testify the boat broke or just the oars broke, it's still a suffix d'oraisa. Why does the Rambam say the boat remained on the water? Not to be medayik that if the boat did not, it's not a suffix d'oraisa. It's a chiddush the other way, that even where the boat is intact and the only thing that was lost were the oars, we put on you the chomrei mesim and you're not b'cheskas chayim. Therefore, in my opinion, the Rambam and the Rashba both agree that if the boat sinks, it's a suffix d'oraisa. So the question is, who do we paskin like? Do we paskin like the Rashba, that we're machmir d'oraisa? Do we paskin like the Rambam? Which Rambam? Rabbi Ashkenazi says the Rambam is mekel. The Radvaz says the Rambam is machmir. Bottom line is Rama paskins like the Rashba, that if all you see is the boat sink, midiraisa, the husband's assumed to be alive, which makes the Titanic a very, very chomer. And b'di'eved, no, it's not okay. B'di'eved, if she got married, since you didn't see anyone drown, you just saw the boat go under, we're machmer like the Rashba, that's subject to rice. Look in the Ramah. The Ramah says, look on the third line, the Ramah and Evan HaEzer, Siman Yud Zayin, Sivkat and Lamed Daled, the Kol Zeh Dafka B'mi Shehidu Lav Shetava Mamish. This is all if you testified that they drowned. In Mayim Shein Lahem Soif. Aval mi she'idu alav shahaya b'sfina. But if all you testified was that he was on a boat, shenishbara, or even if he drowned, but you didn't see and wait there long enough for him to, the amount of time for him to die, Teitzei, she has to get divorced. Yeah. And who says this? He quotes Rambam in Siman Kuf Chav Ches. And even if somebody just testified in general, I saw someone drown, that could be referring to I saw the boat go under, because people confuse drowning and the boat going under. We're worried maybe this type of thing is called drowning. People in general refer to this as drowning. The Teitzei. Ella imkain heyud beferish shatava mamish. I mean, in other words, if someone comes into court and says, I saw a Pliny drown, and she gets married, she has to get divorced, because drowning might only be the boat going under. He has to testify explicitly, I saw him go under and waited long enough that there's no way he could have survived that. Because otherwise, if you just testify in the boat, the Ramah is passing like the Rashba, that unless you testify that the person actually drowned, she would have to get divorced. So this makes the Titanic case very, very serious, because unlikely, look, if you have Eidim that say we saw them go under, then even l'chadchila leitinaseh. Meaning if you somebody testifies, I saw someone go under, and I was waiting there and they didn't surface, even l'chadchila she can't get married. But then at least it's only a d'Rabbanan. But in the case of the Titanic, where at most they could testify that what? That the boat went under, it's going to be an issue with a d'oraisa. And therefore, we have a tshuva here from the Marami Rothenburg about a bachur that went on a boat with 3 arelim, with 3 goyim, and he drowned with the goyim. And one Jew and other goyim heard him cry, Hoshiyeni Elokim Kivayim Ma'am Nafesh. And then they found the boat bottom up, and they found the guy, the bachur's watch, drowned, but they could never find the guy. And where he drowned, there were rocks and a rocky terrain, and it was icy. And the kroivim of the woman say, we have eidos that he died. And people say that the fishermen went out, and they searched for him with nets, and it's impossible that anyone who drowned there could come out. And says Marami Rothenburg, I'm very mesuplik about this case, because we're very meko by Eidos Isha, and on the other hand, we're machmir by Ma'im Shein Lahem Soif, because it could be a wave took him from one side to the other. But, in this case, there were rocks there, and stones, and it was pieces of icebergs. So I don't know what to do. I guess Bachur doesn't mean as we refer, maybe a young man, but it sounded like he was married. And he says like this. It says in L'char there's a sex seika here. Says the Marami Rothenburg, the Gemara says, Mayim she'ein lahem soif, like Palag Rabbanan, that she can't remarry. There are rocks, there are no rocks. There is icebergs, there are no icebergs. Chazal are machmer, and they say she can't marry. Avoma nasa ein lanu ela devei Rabbi seinu. All we could follow are the words of our rabbis that say Mayim shein lam soif ishtay asura. And many chacham have tried to find a heter, and they were not successful. And especially in this case that we're talking about, where it's not a case of Mayim shein lahem soif, because the guy didn't fall into the water, it's the boat that fell. So you're not only dealing with the Safek D'Rabbanan, you're dealing with the Safek D'Oraisa. It would seem to be a very, very difficult matzav. And what we're going to get into next time is, let's the newspapers got a hold of the situation, and this was a very a sensational story. And the Jewish newspapers sort of put out to the rabbis, rabbis, you got to get your act together. These women are going to be stuck without a husband. And the newspapers were like egging on the Rabbanan. First of all, do you really think these women are going to listen to you and not remarry forever? It's an untenable situation. You have to realize maybe they're not going to listen to you. So you might as well find a heter so that they can marry rightfully, because they're going to get married and not create mamzerim. Plus, you're not dealing with, if a woman was 60 years old, 70 years old, and she already had a family, it's one thing. You're dealing with young girls, 20 years old, 25 years old. They never had a family yet, and they're just starting out in life. These are additional factors why the Rabbanan need to be mekel. And the newspapers were sort of like sticking it to the Rabbanan, and they were telling the Rabbanan, and don't delay, because if you don't give a fast psak, these women are going to get married be'isr. So, but on the other hand, we see that this is a very difficult situation, because according to the Rashba, this is not Mayim Shein Lahem Saif. This is worse. This is the mission of Gittin, of Svina Sha'avda Bayam, where not only Loitinase, but in this case, Tetzei. Okay, well, to be continued, Bez Hashem, Tuesday, Mirz Hashem.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.